Welcome to Life Stories. What would you do if someone humiliated you in front of your entire school and every adult in the room looked the other way? Now imagine that moment isn't just about cruelty, but about a system built to silence people like you. Today's story begins with a pair of scissors and ends with a national scandal, federal arrests, and one teenage girl who refused to disappear. It's about power, privilege, and the price of speaking up when the world tells you to stay quiet. If you've ever felt invisible, underestimated, or like the truth wasn't enough, this story was made for you. Let's begin. The scissors made a sound she would never forget. Metal on flesh, clean intention masked by a jagged edge. Ava Monroe didn't scream when her hair hit the floor of room 204. She didn't cry when the laughter rolled in behind it, wave after wave of entitlement, echoing off the old stone walls of Stonemont Prep. She simply sat there, still, as chunks of her chestnut hair fluttered around her sneakers like fallen leaves, and the eyes of 23 classmates, some curious, some complicit, reflected the same thing. Shock and something darker. Satisfaction. The boy standing behind her desk, Chase Whitaker, team captain and heir to a billion-dollar real estate empire, didn't flinch. He twirled the scissors like a trophy, the kind of arrogance that grew in families with trust funds and sealed court records. Behind him, his clique grinned like they were in on the joke of the century. Jackson Reed with his camera hidden under the desk, Brielle Langston already editing clips for her private story, and Tyler Cho leaning casually against the window, watching Ava like she was prey they'd caught in a carefully baited trap. The teacher, Mr. Ellison, didn't intervene. His back remained turned to the whiteboard, his hand frozen in mid-sentence, as if the horror behind him had cracked the chalk as cleanly as Chase had cut Ava's hair. The silence was an indictment all its own. Ava's hand reached up, calm, methodical, and found the uneven ends of what had once been her signature. Her hair had always been her armor, a piece of her late grandmother that no dress code could take, but they'd taken it anyway, on a dare. A prank, they'd say. Just kids being kids. But Ava Monroe wasn't a child, and she never played by the same rules as the children of power. She stood slowly, in a room where everything, the books, the air, the rules, had been designed to shrink her. Ava made herself impossible to ignore. "Mr. Ellison," she said, voice even, cutting, "I'd like to report an assault." The class held its breath. The teacher's face twitched, the cowardice baked into years of appeasing wealth. "It was just a misunderstanding, Miss Monroe. Let's not escalate." Ava took a step forward. "Should I gather the hair for evidence, or will my word be enough for the police report?" The temperature in the room dropped. Chase stopped smiling. Brielle's phone lowered by half an inch. Something shifted, tectonic and irreversible. They'd expected her to cry. Instead, she'd brought the storm. That night, Ava didn't sleep. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table of their two-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in Queens, the smell of detergent clinging to the wallpaper, while her mother, Diane, fresh off a 12-hour shift in the ER, listened with clenched fists and wet eyes. Ava didn't cry even then. But when she slid the printed screenshots of the group chat across the table, the plan, the discussion, the laughter, her mother said only one thing. "This ends now." It was supposed to be over. But then came the knock at the door. Ava opened it to find Catherine Langston, Brielle's mother, and a senior board member at Stonemont, standing in heels too high for mercy and a face too polished for pity. She didn't come to apologize. She came with a flash drive. "I know what this place is," Catherine said. "It ate my daughter's soul before she learned to lie about it, and it's going to eat you too unless you burn it down first." The drive contained 15 years of files, payouts, cover-ups, surveillance footage that was supposed to be erased, reports that were quietly buried under alumni donations. Names Ava recognized, victims she didn't. Proof that her haircut was just the tip of a rot that ran deeper than hair, deeper than bone. She should have been scared. Instead, she felt alive. They'd chosen her thinking she was weak. They had no idea they'd just created a weapon. The next morning, the video went viral. Not the clip Brielle had tried to hide in her close friends list, but a screen recording anonymously posted with the caption, "Watch what they do to scholarship kids at Stonemont." No one knew who leaked it, but Ava had her suspicions. A girl in the back row with silent eyes and perfect grades. Quiet isn't the same as blind. As the world watched, Stonemont circled its wagons. Ava received a letter of warning, then a threat, then an offer. Full tuition through grad school, a stipend, a PR-crafted apology she could read on camera. A misunderstanding between friends, the script read. Ava laughed. The ink hadn't even dried before she handed it to her attorney. And yet, beneath the fury and strategy, something deeper stirred. A question she hadn't let herself ask until now. Why did Catherine Langston give her that flash drive? It wasn't guilt. Catherine didn't guilt. And it wasn't mercy. These people didn't believe in that either. So what secret was she trying to bury beneath Ava's justice? Ava opened the final folder on the drive. Inside, photos, medical records, notes from a psychiatric retreat in Switzerland, a suicide attempt. A name, Isla Langston, Brielle's twin sister, vanished from Stonemont's records, erased. That was the secret. The school hadn't just protected predators, it had rewritten lives. It had made children disappear. What do you do when the place that promised to shape your future turns out to be a machine designed to erase it? How far would you go to bring justice to those who never got the chance to speak? The scissors had started it, but Ava Monroe was about to finish it with fire. And in part 2, the school's power players will learn what happens when the evidence fights back. By the time Ava walked into the emergency board meeting, the mask of Stonemont Prep had already begun to crack. News vans circled the parking lot like vultures sensing blood beneath polished brick. Protesters, parents, alumni, students gathered beyond the iron gates, holding handmade signs that screamed things like accountability over endowments and no more silence for the silent. But inside the marbled halls of the boardroom, the air still smelled of old money, cologne, and denial. Ava wasn't alone. Seated beside her was Elena Cho, a civil rights attorney whose younger sister had once been a name buried in Stonemont's past, just like Isla Langston, just like Ashley Chen. Elena was sharp and calm, the kind of woman who had spent years sharpening her fury into a weapon so precise it cut without blood. On the other side of the table, the board members sat like statues. Richard Whitaker, Chase's father, hadn't blinked since Ava entered. His fingers were laced, jaw tight, the exact posture of a man used to controlling outcomes with checks, not consequences. Dr. Hastings, the head of school, began the meeting with a voice so smooth it almost passed for concern. "We're here today," she said, "not to accuse, but to clarify. Stonemont has always prided itself on maintaining a safe, exceptional academic environment. However, recent events..." Ava leaned forward, her voice cutting through the script like a scalpel. "Recent events? You mean the public assault you tried to pass off as a misunderstanding? Or the 15 years of documented cover-ups your staff facilitated while collecting donation checks?" A flicker of panic passed through Dr. Hastings' eyes. The room grew still. Richard Whitaker cleared his throat, ready to shift the blame, but Ava reached in her backpack and pulled out the flash drive. "Let's not waste time. You want clarification? Here it is." She passed the drive to the projection tech. The screen lit up. Emails, financial spreadsheets, video files. The room watched in frozen silence as faces they knew, teachers, donors, board members, appeared on camera, laughing over disciplinary decisions, dismissing sexual assault reports, bribing families into silence. Then the final folder, conversion protocols. The screen shifted, medical records, diagnostic profiles, audio recordings from staff meetings. 90% of these students were placed on behavioral medication without parental knowledge, Elena said quietly. Scholarship kids flagged as problems were sent to therapists hired by the school. Most were withdrawn within a year. The projection stopped on one name. Ava's. Ava didn't breathe for several seconds. She hadn't expected to find herself in the files, hadn't expected to be part of the rot. Her own file read like a character assassination. Defensive. Paranoid. Possible oppositional defiance disorder. There was a note she didn't recognize, allegedly signed by her mother, approving counseling sessions she'd never attended. She turned slowly toward Dr. Hastings. "You forged a signature to medicate me?" Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the quiet fury of someone whose autonomy had been stolen in the shadows. The room erupted. Objections, denials, threats. Richard Whittaker stood, red-faced and shouting that this was a setup, that none of it would hold in court. Elena leaned over, placed a hand gently on Ava's shoulder, and whispered, "You've already won the moment they lost their calm." But Ava didn't feel like she'd won anything. Not yet. Because as the documents flashed across the screen, as her own name glared from the files like a scarlet letter, something inside her shifted. For the first time, she wasn't sure if she was fighting for justice or revenge. The two had always felt the same. Now they didn't. After the meeting, Ava found herself in the back stairwell of the school, the cold concrete pressed against her spine, trying to remember the sound of her grandmother's voice. Steady, Irish tough, always reminding her that the truth can slice cleaner than any lie, but it leaves a longer scar. Her phone buzzed. A message from Brielle Langston. "You shouldn't have brought up Isla. You don't know what you're dealing with." It wasn't a threat. It was something worse. A warning. That night, Ava sat across from her mother at the kitchen table again, the flash drive lying between them like a ticking bomb. Diane looked older than she had that morning, lines deeper, eyes heavier. "They said if I speak out, I could lose my license. St. Joseph's gets donations from the Whittakers, too." Ava nodded. "I know. I found the memo. They tried to medicate me, Mom, without telling you." Diane's hands clenched into fists. "I trusted them. I trusted that the sacrifice meant something, that this school would give you something I couldn't." Her voice broke. "And instead, they tried to erase you." Ava reached across the table, placing her hand over her mother's. They failed. But deep down, she wasn't so sure. Because the more she uncovered, the more it seemed like the rot hadn't just infiltrated the school. It had changed her. She was starting to see herself the way they had written her down. Difficult, angry, uncontrollable. And maybe that was the cost of fighting fire with fire. You couldn't help but smell like smoke. Do you think Ava is still seeking justice, or has she crossed the line into vengeance? Tomorrow the FBI arrives. But not everyone in the building is ready to tell the truth, and someone's about to make sure Ava never speaks again. The morning the federal agents arrived at Stonemont Prep, the sky was an unbroken sheet of gray, heavy with the kind of tension that precedes either a storm or a reckoning. Ava Monroe stood just outside the school's iron gates, her mother beside her in quiet solidarity, Elena Cho flanking the other side, briefcase in hand. Inside Ava's chest, something thudded. Not fear, not quite triumph. Something harder to name. The culmination of months of buried truth clawing its way to the surface. As the FBI vehicles pulled in, camera crews swarmed like bees around honey, and somewhere within those century-old halls, the most powerful people in the district were already calling their lawyers. The raid was clean, almost surgical. Agents moved through the administrative offices with warrants in hand, collecting files, hard drives, and the shocked silence of people who thought their secrets were too rich to fail. Dr. Hastings was escorted out without resistance, her expression blank except for a subtle tremor in her jaw. Richard Whittaker didn't go quietly. He shouted about legacy, about being targeted, about his donations, until they read him the charges out loud. Tax fraud, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to endanger minors. The handcuffs made a metallic sound that echoed down the locker-lined corridors like a bell tolling the end of something old and poisonous. But justice, Ava learned, wasn't a clean story. It wasn't always a gavel slamming or a villain confessing on the stand. Sometimes it was quieter, messier, more human. The school board resigned in disgrace, Stonemont's funding was frozen pending the investigation, and the school itself was placed under federal oversight. Ava, rather than being expelled, was offered an official apology, which she declined. An apology isn't accountability, she told them. It's PR. Instead, she issued her own statement on national television. She stood in front of a podium, her voice unwavering, her new bob sharp and defiant, and said, "They cut my hair to make me small, but I never fit their mold to begin with." The room stood still as she continued. This isn't about one attack. It's about the thousands of ways institutions protect the powerful and punish the brave. That ends now. A week later, she testified before a congressional committee on private school abuse and institutional accountability. Reporters began calling it the Monroe Movement. Her story went viral again, this time not as a victim, but as a force of change. But the weight of everything, of becoming a symbol, of carrying other people's traumas along with her own, began to crack something in Ava. She couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, couldn't stop replaying the moment in that classroom when everything changed, not because of what Chase did, but because no one stopped him. She kept wondering what it said about her that she hadn't cried, that she had chosen war over healing. Was justice supposed to hurt this much? One night, unable to sit with the noise in her head, she went back to Stonemont. The building was dark and mostly empty. The school was being reorganized, turned into a charter for underserved youth. The old portraits of founders and donors had been taken down. Ava wandered to room 204. The desks were rearranged, the chalkboard cleaned, the air thinner somehow. She stood at her old seat and traced the outline of the wood where her fingers used to rest. The room felt smaller now, or maybe she had simply outgrown it. She heard footsteps and turned. Brielle Langston stood in the doorway. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "You destroyed everything," she said, not accusing, just stating. Ava didn't respond right away. "Did you know?" she asked finally. "About Isla?" Brielle nodded. "She was never weak, you know. She just couldn't fake it like I could." There was a long silence. Then Brielle stepped forward and handed Ava a small box. Inside was a hair tie, the one Ava had worn the day of the assault. "I kept it," Brielle said. "I don't know why. Maybe guilt. Maybe I thought it was a trophy." Ava closed the box without a word. Back home, Ava sat on the fire escape outside their apartment, watching the city breathe beneath her. Her mom joined her, 2 mugs of tea in hand. "You did it," Diane said softly. "You tore it all down." Ava nodded. "But I don't feel better." Her mother looked at her for a long moment. "Justice isn't about feeling better, baby. It's about giving people after you a reason to feel safe." They sat in silence. A car alarm wailed in the distance. Somewhere, someone laughed. Life, as always, moved forward. 2 years later, Ava crossed the stage at her college graduation. She wore a cap decorated with the words, "Not your scapegoat, not your silence." In the audience, Diane clapped with tears in her eyes. Elena was there too, and so was Brielle, sitting quietly in the back, a social worker now, working with kids who had no one else. After the ceremony, Ava received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a letter typed on old stationery. "You don't know me, but my daughter was at Stonemont 5 years ago. She tried to speak up and no one listened. She almost didn't make it. But because of you, she applied to college again. Because of you, she believes change is possible. Thank you for lighting the way." Ava folded the letter and tucked it into her bag. That night, as the city lights glimmered like possibilities, she sat on the roof of their building and looked up at the sky. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one with long hair and sharper dreams, and she smiled, not because the fight was over, but because she finally understood why she fought. How did this story make you feel? Share your thoughts below. Your voice matters. Comment 100 if you felt something powerful from Ava's journey. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know your country. Share this video with a friend who believes in justice, and thank you for watching Life Stories.